you're helping them learn what the words are. Action words are, naming words are. Is there a right way and a wrong way to do that?
Yeah, there are. I mean, what we talked about, we would say today, are basically 5 strategies. I actually came up with 6 in the end, but so I'll drop one. But anyway, yes, there are. And often parents don't always necessarily, in their mind, don't know the difference maybe between functional, constructive and imaginative. But the point is you don't need to know that, because the very first strategy is if you wait, watch and follow. So that's one strategy. So you wait by... get down to the child's level, and before you engage and do anything, just wait and watch what the child's doing and what are they doing with the toy, and follow their lead. So much language is developed just by following a child's lead, and the reason is because children are become increasingly responsive and engage better in the relationship with the parent when the parent's following their lead. It's no different to adults. We look at popular psychology around the dynamics of establishing rapport quickly and establishing strong rapport between people. We look at things like mirroring. So you mirror the person's body language. You can match some of the ways that they phrase things. If you see that they are predisposed to be a visual learner, you might use more visual language. Phrases like, I see what you mean, instead of I hear what you say. So these kinds of things are rapport building exercises that equally children respond to, but they just respond to it in a physical sense when you're following their game, and the language you're using in following that game are literally the words they're using, the sounds that they're using. And I mean, my job is when a child comes into my clinic, I'm tasked with building rapport as fast as I can so I can get where I want to go. And this is it. This is the big
it's
have.
It's also just not getting in the way of what's interesting them.
Yeah.
So you're supplementing or enhancing what's interesting them rather than getting it ahead of it or redirecting it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So in practice, how might that work? Well, here we are, strategy 1, wait, watch and follow. Mm-hmm. And when you follow, what are you doing?
So if the child's got a car on the ground and they're zooming it along, I get a car and I zoom along behind them. If the child's building blocks, I try to join in and add a block. But if some children don't like it, they're quite territorial, so I build a block tower next to them. But I'm equally doing what they're doing. I match the pace, so I don't try to rush ahead and go, yep, done, finished, beat you. You know, that's not rapport building. Yeah, I go at their pace.
It's tempting though.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Part of my job is to lose games. I consistently lose games with preschoolers to build their sense of accomplishment and that they are good at something, they're better than me at something. So I follow their lead with my body and my words and my pace, and that usually gets a response. They usually become interested, and they will usually allow me more into the game. The second strategy is stop asking questions, because that's often what we do as parents, and the reason we do that is because we want our children to say more or to say their first word. So we keep testing them. Don't ask them a question. They're not speaking very well yet, or they're still developing their communication system. So just comment, just give them words for what they're doing. And you want to match that to the level they're at, again, following their lead. If they're at the single word level, you give single words. If they're at the 2-word level, you give 2 words. So it's quite simple, and it helps the child to, you're staying within the bubble of their experience and their comprehension. The third thing is, which is kind of what we're alluding to here, the modelling of language. So that's kind of, so asking less questions, commenting, and I guess modelling language is the other strategy in there.
What's modelling language?
Modelling language is just giving language to the child, sorry. A simpler way of saying it, I guess, is commenting. So it's the same thing. And then thirdly, you want to, when you're working with your child, when you're playing with your child, try to repeat what the child is saying and extend it. So on the one hand, you're giving words for what they're doing. You're being David Attenborough and you're narrating. So you're narrating their play, and then when they do say something, I will often imitate because I'm following their lead, and then I just stretch it slightly by adding something else, another word or a new idea. So, for example, they're giving me a naming word, so they go ball, and then I add roll ball. So it's an action word with the naming word. So I'm just giving them another idea. Or if they say roll ball, I might go, oh, roll ball fast. So
and will you do the action?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because at all times, you are engaging at their level in play. You're immersed in it. You are being like a child. And children love it. Because
that's interesting, because back to what we were saying earlier about the importance of play, including free play, is there a time also just to stay right out of it, or 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like you're doing the dishes and they're playing and you're sort of interacting from where you are? Or are you an advocate of being quite, making the time and being quite involved?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty hands-on, but at the same time, being a father of 5 kids, I mean, if I read 10 minutes to each of my children.
There's plenty of time for independence.
You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a balance there for every parent, and sometimes you just don't have the time. And there's equally, and if people go back through your archives, they'll see we've talked about building language within routines, because that is equally legitimate. Because parents are pretty pressured for time.
Yeah. So repeat and extend, and then what's
then
the
enticing.
Next
so sometimes you'll get some children where they're a bit reluctant to engage and say more, particularly if they're experiencing a delay in their development. So I sabotage is how I do it, but you do it in a way that's fun. So, for example, I might play a game with the child, particularly well-known games, and then you pause it after you've done it a few times. So if they're on your knee and you're doing the Grand Old Duke of York, for example, you've done it a few times, the child knows the bit where he goes up the hill and down the hill, blah, blah, blah. Then you do the bit where you drop your knee so that they fall, and they love that bit. So that's kind of the high point of the game. And so what you're going to do is you're going to pause just before that moment to entice them to want to make a sound, a gesture, a word, to come to move towards you with communicative intent, to move towards you so that you can reward that and model it back. Other ones that I use would be offering choice. So particularly with my children who have one or are putting 2 words, so single word users or putting 2 words together or more. If I want to develop more, choice is a great way, because choice you're not asking them to speak. You're legitimately giving them a choice. And if you want this to progress any further, you kind of have to open your mouth and say something. So do you want the green apple, or do you want the yellow banana, for example, if you're working on colour? Or if it's just a single word, do you want the apple or the banana? And often kids who are reluctant to communicate will point or grab, and then you're just giving them the word, waiting for a second to let them process that, then giving them the object. Don't hold the object back, because that turns from teaching to teasing, and that's irritating. And then your child will become reluctant to engage with you because they think your choice is a tease.
So you're just leaving enough of a pause to give them the opportunity.
Yep, that's exactly right. Anywhere between 3 and 5 seconds, which feels like an eternity for a child, that you're always used to reading their signs and just giving them what they want. But you're trying to create a gap or a pause that is, in a sense, non-verbally saying to the child, I expect you to take a turn. And you even have a look on your face like, I'm expecting you to take a turn. Raise your eyebrows. Look like you're expecting it.
A look of expectation.
A look of
expectation. And it's also giving them time, because it's just like, you know what it's like trying to learn a few words even of a second language. When it's not your first language, it takes time to search through the archive and find what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
So you're just allowing time for what you want to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Those various stages of play, how do they affect the kind of interaction that you have? So we went through functional and constructive. Once we're into make-believe, is that the same as imaginative, or does that come after?
No, it's the same.
So once we're into that stage, it's interesting, isn't it? Because they will be inventing their own meanings.
Yep.
And it's a little bit harder just to wait, watch, follow. But should you be in there as well?
Yep. So if children are at the stage of imaginative play and they're constructing their own games, they usually, one of the things that comes with imaginative play is the development of narratives. So children start to narrate their play. And so often the earlier version of it is that they basically recreate known scenes, putting baby to bed, feeding the baby, those kinds of things. That's the earlier stage of imaginative play. But as they become more sophisticated, they move on to creating novel scenes. And those are exciting because you don't know where the play is going. And that play can become absolutely hilarious if you're following their lead, because as a parent, you begin to see elements of your life and how you are as a parent being mapped out in their play, and sometimes that's hilarious. So they'll do like a telling off, and you can hear yourself in the telling off.
So you're being mocked, basically.
Basically, you're being mocked.
It's funny you're talking about Nathan. I remember one of the points he made, this is Nathan Wallace, listeners, one of the points he made about not mucking with kids' early play is if they come up with their own explanation for the way the Milky Way is or what the sky is, don't go and give them the Encyclopedia Britannica exact right answers. They'll have this wonderful creative idea for it and let that run. Is it true with words? Are there times where they will come up, well, I mean, kids often invent their own languages, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
And or if they're getting words wrong, how much do you bother about that, or do you let the flow of the conversation happen and let it pass for now?
It's a good question. It leads us actually to the last strategy, which is fix it up. You say it back and you try to fix it up, but there are times when words are close. I remember my 16-year-old daughter, when she was about 3, we were driving somewhere in the evening and it was foggy. Well, we were around by the airport, actually, Wellington Airport, and it was quite foggy and misty. And as we were driving along, she said to my wife and I at the time, "That looks explory."
What a great word.
Isn't that a great word? Yeah,
no
explory.
one's going to mess with that word.
Exactly. And it's like, no,
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along. So today the government has made publicly available documents related to the appointment and process for the CTO. The release contains documents relating to the appointment, communications with Derek Handley, and documents relating to the resignation of Claire Curran. They make public the following information: a text from Derek Handley to the Prime Minister in November containing an offer to help the country. The Prime Minister did not respond. A phone call between the Acting Chief of Staff and Mr Handley in late December, where Mr Handley again made an offer of assistance to the country. It was an introductory call and no further action was taken. The documents show that the CTO role was not discussed in either that phone call or Mr Handley's text to the Prime Minister in November. The documents also contain communications between Claire Curran and the Prime Minister regarding the CTO role. It is clear from these communications that the Prime Minister was not involved in the shortlisting of candidates and that Claire acted independently on deciding who the preferred candidates were. The documents confirm that Mr Handley was offered the role pending conflict of interest checks. As I said at the time, this was reflected in the settlement Mr Handley received when the role was rescoped and the appointment process stopped. Earlier this week, I called Mr Handley to apologise for the impact this process has had on him and his family. Today's release is a comprehensive and thorough account of the process involved in this matter. I'm happy to take questions.
Does it include all of the communications contained on Ms Curran's Gmail account as well?
It does, in as far as they relate to this role. Of course, the normal reasons for withholding information in terms of things about other people who apply for the role, that some of that information has been withheld, but this contains the emails from Ms Curran's Gmail account.
Who went through that email account? Did she go through and select the emails herself, or were they independently audited? How do we know that they're all the emails?
So Ms Curran went through her account and staff assisted with that process.
Is it appropriate that she offered Derek Handley the role before all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed?
Oh, well, she was keeping Mr Handley up to date. It had gone through the process, it had gone through the appointments and honours process. She was telling him that was a conditional offer that was subject to some of the other conditions that were put out there.
But he was worried about
he was worried about the rush to the appointment announcement. He talked about the risks and that conflicts of interest hadn't been settled, but it appears that that was going ahead for that August date.
As the documents also show that those August dates were pulled back. That Mr Handley was concerned that all the I's were dotted and the T's crossed, and that was appropriate.
Was it appropriate, or is it usual in those circumstances, that a minister would offer verbally in such a high-profile role?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind, this is quite an unusual position. It's actually a ministerial appointment, so that there is a slightly different process. That Ms Curran was actually asked by the interview panel to go back and have some contact with Mr Handley after the initial interview and ask some questions, so that there was an appropriate line of communication that was opened up between Ms Curran and Mr Handley at the request of the interview panel, and she was keeping him abreast of process. It is not unusual in any recruitment process. I think many of us know that, to be kept up to date to where things are at.
Does it further show issues of judgment with Claire Curran?
Oh look, the Prime Minister has said this week, the former Minister herself has said, no one is pretending that everything has been got right with this process. A Minister has lost her job, and this week I have apologised to Mr Handley on behalf of the Government.
Is it usual for ministers to communicate via platforms such as WhatsApp?
Is it usual for ministers to communicate with each other or with... Yeah, well, I mean, there's a variety. I think this is 2018. There are a variety of communication channels that people use.
What's the approach going to be used from now on? If journalists or other members of the public request OIAs, WhatsApp and other third-party apps automatically going to be included now?
I think one of the most important things to remember is actually that the OIA is mode neutral.
But it hasn't acted like that in the past. I mean, we haven't got WhatsApp messages in the past that there have been relevant communications, and they haven't been included in OIA requests.
Certainly the Prime Minister has given a very clear directive to ministers that the OIA is mode neutral. It doesn't matter what it is. The information is information, and that needs to be released.
It's taken something like that to actually open up probably what are significant communications through third-party apps that haven't been included. We get emails and we get briefings and that sort of thing, despite communications being clearly specified in OIA requests in the past.
Well, I know personally that I've been asked for WhatsApp conversations and I've released them, and I can only speak to that.
The issue, though, that with the traditional communications, emails, etc., staffers and other people have access to that information, so the minister doesn't act essentially as gatekeeper, whereas for things like WhatsApp, private communications using Gmail, WhatsApp, the minister could act as gatekeeper. How do we make sure?
Look, I don't think this is new. WhatsApp is there's very little difference in terms of the same issues are there with text messages, and this is something that we've seen as an issue for a number of years. The point is that if there is information exchange, irrespective of platform, that is subject to the Official Information Act request. And when an Information Act request comes in, staff ask a minister what communications there have been through applications like text message or WhatsApp, and that is worked through with staff.
To make sure that the minister's being truthful in revealing everything?
Well, in the same way there is with email.
When the Prime Minister recently discouraged ministers or told ministers that they should probably not be using Gmail for parliamentary business, did she extend that to platforms like WhatsApp?
What she made abundantly clear to us is that the OIA is mode neutral. WhatsApp, let's be very clear, WhatsApp there's very little difference in how you account for it with text messages, which has been a long established way of communication between ministers and between people that they're having conversations with.
That's not what the Prime Minister said, though, in her communication to the media. She said that she had made it clear to ministers that they probably shouldn't be using Gmail for parliamentary business.
That's right. You asked me about the WhatsApp application and whether she extended it to that. Right. I said she made it very clear there was mode neutral, and I made the point that there's very difference in terms of how it is that ministers account for that with text messages. They both reside on ministers' phones, and they need to work through that with their staff when Official Information Act comes in. This is not a new issue. This has been around for as long as texting has been around for.
Has this release thrown up any more issues for you as you look forward to rescope or review the role in the future?
Well, what we also revealed was the information that I received from the Department of Internal Affairs. That's part of the release that we did here today. And I've spoken previously about the fact that what became very clear to me after my initial briefing to an incoming minister on the 30th of August, that there was an opportunity to see how this fits with the broader piece of work that the government is doing around innovation.
But beyond that, anything else in these documents that change that course or as you throw up any red flags for you?
No, what this does is shows that there was a suitable process. It's what we've said, that we had the State Services Commission come through and say that. The Prime Minister has obviously interpreted that in a broader way, that this has been less than ideal, and the reason why we apologise to Mr Handley. But what this release does is it underscores what the Prime Minister has been saying, that she was not actively involved in the appointment process for the CTO. That was the responsibility of the then Minister, Ms Curran.
Do you think the State Services Commission might review its view that this was a robust process after seeing some of these communications?
No, and actually there is Crown Law advice to that now that they have seen all these communications, they have reaffirmed that.
The picture that the Prime Minister painted in the House of her contact with Derek Handley, do you think that matches up from what we've seen today, when her acting chief of staff, the president of the party, had phone conversations with him very recently?
Absolutely. It underscores and underlines what the Prime Minister said in the House. She was asked about communications with Mr Handley in regard to the CTO role. She answered in the House that she did not reply to either the text message or the Gmail about that. She also said in the House that she wanted to go back and do a thorough audit of her communications about any further communications there may have been with Mr Handley. There was the 4th of November text. Now I think we can probably all cast our minds back to how many offers of support and help that the Prime Minister was receiving on the 4th of November. Of course she left for her first bilateral in Australia the following day, and a couple of days after that she left for APEC, and she didn't reply to that text message.
Is that being totally transparent though, when it was her acting chief of staff at the time and the party president who had phone conversations with her?
Well, I think what actually that shows is, one, what it makes abundantly clear that in terms of the acting chief of staff's conversation, there was no follow-up from that phone call that happened on the 22nd of December, and that was at the suggestion of the party president that he contact him. And what it shows, the fact that there was a very similar offer of help that was received in April by the Prime Minister from Mr Handley, that there had been no follow-up from those November and December's offers of help in 2017. They hadn't been acted on.
You said earlier this week that part of the reason you're rescoping the role is because the job description had kind of like got a little bit beyond its what had been intended. Was that due to the former minister expanding the role herself, or like, how did that occur? That the job
throughout the process. So obviously there was a DediMag who were offering the digital advisory panel that the minister had got together. That had some. Do you want me to start that again about that? The minister and the process that we're going through. So the minister had assembled a digital advisory panel that was giving her advice on that. And there had been, the advice that I got from DIA when I assumed the portfolio, that there had been some increase in the scope of the role from the original job description that was signed off from Cabinet in November or December 2017.
Did she overstep then the boundaries of what she should have been doing as a minister by
No, I made the assessment as an incoming minister that there had been an increase of that scope, given the Prime Minister had asked me to consider the role in the context of my other portfolio responsibilities of research, science and innovation. I wanted to make sure that we weren't doubling up, that we weren't having overlap, and the country was going to get the absolute best value out of this role.
Can you just explain in one sentence what the role is? I don't think it's been very clear throughout this whole process.
It's to be the champion for the digital economy of New Zealand.
What does that entail in terms of deliverables?
I will have more to tell you at the end of November when I take back a rescoping of that role to Cabinet.
So would you plan to, is that the time
Yes, so that's when I took the item to the Cabinet Committee on the 12th from memory, the 12th of September, and said that I wished to rescope that role and had that signed off by a Cabinet Committee. I made a commitment to take back a rescoping of the role by the end of November.
Will Derek Hanley be in the mix for that?
Oh look, we've made no decisions around that. One of the things that I've asked officials to go back and is actually consider what the core functions of the role are as a first place to start this rescoping. Okay, thank you.
Who brought this?
If it doesn't allow more social housing, I tamaki makaurau ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
The government has released all of the communications and documents it holds relating to the appointment of Chief Technology Officer, although large parts have been redacted. Derek Handley was paid out about $100,000 after being offered the job and then having it withdrawn. The former Services Minister, Claire Curran, resigned in the aftermath of questions about how she handled official communications about the role. Mr Handley has already released his communications with Ms Curran and the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. The hundreds of pages of documents just released include exchanges between Ms Curran and the Prime Minister on WhatsApp throughout the year, in which they discussed the appointment process. While there was mention of Mr Handley as one of the final four, there were no comments from Ms Ardern influencing the choice of candidate.